Well, we are now turning our attention to another matter entirely. Of course, it's still within the country, and we're focusing on infrastructure this morning. We're being joined now by the Minister of Power, Works and Housing, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Thank you for having me, and good morning.
Good morning. Are you still basking in the euphoria of your party's win at the national level?
Well, elections are over. Those who still want to claw back can do so. The purpose of asking for a new mandate is to continue the work that we have started, because there's still a lot of work to do.
Okay, there's definitely work to be done, especially in your ministry. And there are those, before we get to your ministry, there are those who argue, I mean, while I want to say congratulations, and I think that they will be in order, however, there are those who say that there is a lot of work to be done on our electoral process. Would you like to say something on strengthening our electoral process, especially since right now the opposition has gone to court? We understand the tribunal will be sitting today. They are saying that this victory was obtained by fraud. You were Director, Election Planning and Monitoring of your party. What would you be recommending as a way to strengthen the electoral process moving forward?
You see, discussing how people feel in our election must first ask all of us to interrogate ourselves. There can only be one winner in that contest, in every contest, and how do people take victory and lack of success? How many people who went to that election prepared victory and concession speeches? This is a tradition in other democracies, because if you expect to win, you can also lose. And we've seen by that we've lost some states, we've gained some. The presidential election results were widely accredited by the observers to be in conformity with the law and all of that. The EU, the ECOWAS Commission, the African Union all said that they were satisfied with what they saw. It is the prerogative of the party that is dissatisfied with the process to do what they have done, go to court. And then we'll take it from there. It's an ongoing exercise, but really and truly, I think we must begin to respect the voters, that they can make a choice in one election and make a different choice in another election. And as a largely two-party democracy strengthens and, of course, accommodates other smaller parties, we will understand in fullness of time that this is really all about service. That's what it means to me, at least. And an opportunity to serve decided by the people. And I think what the people have voted for is what we have continued to canvass, that we are better than the other side. Our results over the last 3.5, 4 years show that we have moved the needle forward, and they have entrusted us with the mandate to consolidate on what we have done.
That's the party, perhaps, but what about the process? Some analysts
now, in terms of the process,
yes.
Look, an electoral law or act, for example, is the result of what people see and what they expect to see. And those things are not static, they are dynamic. Some of the things I would like to see changed, for example, is how results are announced. All of us complain, oh, this process is too tedious, we take 4 days. The truth is that in other democracies, it's the media that projects and announces the results based on results that are collated from exit polls, and the number that they can verify that it is impossible to have another verdict. During the process of this presidential election, for example, even before the results were announced, Reuters, and their reputation is as big as you know, had issued a press statement that President Buhari was in on an unassailable lead. They wouldn't do that if they didn't see the figures that everybody saw. Everybody polled, many people did it. We did exit polls. So we knew when the results were coming. By the time the president visited his situation room, we already had 17 million votes counted. He was leading by 3 million votes. Yaga, one of the most funded electoral monitoring group, their results were not too far off from what we had and what INEC ultimately declared. So I would like, for example, to also see, and then let me just make this point quickly. So the American election, for example, who bothers, who sees the Electoral Commission chairman? They don't. But he's busy doing exactly what INEC is doing. He's doing it in the back room, because there's a sense of acceptance, there's a culture that these results represent what everybody sees. And so when the media projects the result, there's hardly ever any dispute, except in some cases we've had. It is really 4 or 5 days, sometimes 3 days after, that the American Electoral Commission finally, formally announces the results. Can we have that sense of discipline, sense of concord, sense of contest and competition to accept results? And can we begin to enthrone the media to really play this role? That's the kind of reform I would like to see, for example. I would like to see reform about election spending. Because now you can't do a presidential election by law with more than 1 billion naira. Is that enough to pay agents in 176,000 polling units? Mm. Now, is that enough to also pay for the airtime when we come for the rallies? Mm.
That's definitely something that's been explored in the courts. And I know so that we can
all of these things are, it's a total new debate. And I think that the new parliament are working with the executive and all of the electoral monitoring groups who want to see a stronger democratic process. These are all of the issues that should happen in full debate, committee work, plenary, and these are matters I make myself available to offer whatever little contributions I can make.
Mm. Well, now let's talk about power, which a lot of Nigerians believe we need to move forward in this country. Where would you say that we are currently as regards the state of power? We do know that the government still oversees transmission. You have argued on this program severally that we now have capacity to wheel 7,500 megawatts. That's the transmission company of Nigeria. Are we generating as much? From what we understand, we are currently at about 4,600 megawatts. Why are we not producing as much as the transmission company of Nigeria claims it has the capacity to wheel? What is still the constraints?
The transmission capacity has grown again. The last simulation that we did in December 2018 was 8,100. The generation capacities are also increasing, but it's a value chain where the distribution uptake is not matching up with the available power. And of course, from time to time, there are snags in the value chain. Maybe a 33 kV line goes, maybe gas issues, maintenance even in some places requires shutdown because we still don't have enough power. But I can say very, very confidently that clearly we've moved forward. The reason we're asking for a renewed mandate, which we have now got, is to move even further. We set out short-term goals in my ministry. First, get incremental power. We have delivered on incremental power, and we will continue to increase. We are hopeful to see that at this next level of obligation, what we want to see now is more of incremental power and stable power in some places. Sitting down here, I can tell you some states that have almost 24-hour power today. Kebbi, for example, Yobe, for example, and some have 5, some have 10. There are still outages, and even all of this is still a little fragile, and we need to consolidate. There are issues at the distribution end of metering, of outdated assets. Some of these assets, one I went to in Aba, for example, the substation was installed in 1960, and there was no expansion after that.
Honorable Minister, I'm afraid I have to interrupt you. We have to take
time for a break.
Yes, it's a break. It's break time now, and when we come back, we'll talk about metering, which is one area. It's still a very sore spot for a lot of Nigerians, and they're complaining furiously about it. In just a moment, please stay with us. Well, the Ministry of Power, Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, is still with us in the studio, and he was giving us a status update of where we are in terms of the provision of electricity across the country. Honorable Minister?
Yes, I was saying that some of the assets at the distribution end have either been overgrown by a growing population. So I was telling you about Aba, where we just had to bring in new transformers to increase the capacity to supply and support a substation that was built in 1960 when the place was virtually not that populated. These are some of the initiatives that we've taken in place like Ejigbo. We've connected communities like Ilashe who have never had power to the grid. So it's an ongoing process. There are some communities in Nasarawa, for example, that we've used solar systems just to give them electricity for the first time in their lives. We're working...
That's an off-grid solution.
Yeah, they're off-grid and on-grid solutions. So we're applying many solutions at the same time. So, and when we're talking about how much megawatt is being built, we're only seeing one side of the picture. We've created a new page, the off-grid solution, which was never in our public conversation before about power. So we're doing markets, we're doing schools. There are 9 universities that their equipment are now in the port we're trying to clear. The field work is going on. So all of this will come together. I have no doubt in my mind at all.
But that doesn't quite answer the question as to why it is that we have capacity. You say we have capacity in the transmission company because we have to take your word for it.
Yeah.
However, not all of the capacity is being used. Perhaps we don't know what the problem is. Is it that not enough is being generated?
When you generate energy, I think I've dealt with this before. Let us use the generator at home.
Yes.
The day you buy it, it may be a 5 kV generator. Now 5 kV is 5,000 watts of energy. Now your bulb is probably 60 watts. So if you switch on that generator, the meter will show you that it can give you 5 kV. But if you switch on only a bulb, it will supply only 60 watts. It is the demand side that the generation responds to. And therefore, the distribution side, where we have insufficient transformers, old lines, outgrown distribution substations, is the explanation I am giving you. If you don't demand the power, the generation company can't take it. And that's why you will hear generation companies saying, oh, they are being restricted to an amount of power, that they can't push out all of the power that they have. It's not necessarily only because TCN can't wheel in some places. It's largely today, the majority of the problem is at the distribution end. That's why government has now decided, as a 40% holder of equity in the discos, to invest. We have approval to invest 72 billion. This will involve installing transformers, breakers, new lines and all of that. Those approvals have been submitted to Cabinet Office. As they come through the Federal Executive Council, we will see improved capacity because we have at least 2,000 megawatt that is not getting out to consumers.
Isn't that going to be raising controversy since distribution has already been privatized?
It has been privatized. We are 40% shareholders. If the distribution companies can't raise capital and government as a shareholder can mobilize funds, we have set out conditions and that this will be like shareholders' loans. I think we are past the era of controversy. Let's solve the problems first and then we can deal with controversies later. And for me, really, the public do not care what controversies you have. They want service. And the Buhari government is determined to provide that service.
Well, while you're providing service, there is definitely going to be friction among some people. I know that oftentimes you have said you don't want to talk about, is it union bodies within the electricity companies or amongst electricity companies. However, there is this electricity association of National Electricity Distributors. They seem to have a tiff with the NERC. Are you aware of their tiff over metering and how you waded in?
I read some of the reports in the media, and that's the extent of my awareness. But I just want to say very, very clearly that in a regulated industry, whether it's banking, whether it's telecoms, whether it is broadcasting, whether it is football, the regulated entity cannot have tips with its regulator, so long as the regulator acts within the law. So the question for NEC as the regulator is to ask itself, did it issue a license to an association? And I think I will stop there. NEC knows that the condition for holding a license is the minimum performance of certain covenanted and contracted obligations. And I'm sure the NEC chairman and his team will be the appropriate person to bring to this forum to come and deal with those responsibilities. Because since privatization, there's a law And it sets out everybody's powers. My own powers are clearly defined. Provide direction and policy. NEC is the referee in this match. So if as a player in a football field, I want to referee and I want to play, then I leave it to your imagination. But even a player on a field, if they give you a red card, you go out.
Well, then can you give us a status update on the meter asset provider regulation as expected to end the meter challenges? That is still a major
Yes.
trouble spot for
As I
consumers.
said, the biggest challenge that we face today is at the distribution end, and the reasons are historical: lack of capital, foreign exchange, change prices, change their plans, and all of those issues. But so there was not enough capital, for example, one of the reasons to supply meters, and we decided that we cannot sit by idly. We can use our regulatory power and our policy power. So we created a policy called meter asset providers. What this does is to create a new class of investments and businessmen whose core business will be manufacture, produce, supply, and install meters, and fill the gap that the distribution companies cannot raise capital to fill. They can't do so alone. They must do so under a procurement policy with the distribution companies. So Disco Malpe says, look, these are the consumers that I can meter. Meter asset licensee Fashola, can you meter them on these conditions for me? How much is the price of your meter? So that policy has been approved. There's a procurement process to it for transparency and accountability. I think 121 companies have applied. They have shortlisted, I think, about 60. And I think 14 have now qualified because they now have agreements with different discos. And we are now in the process of issuing them licenses to start.
Are you going to be giving them a time span within which they should be able to, or targets at the very minimum?
I would expect that NERC would do that as part of its licensing conditions, because there is no regulated agency or organ that is operating under a license that does not have conditions. Let us go back to what we all know. Even in banking, even in insurance, from time in insurance, Nikon comes and says, I'm sending you a target, capitalize. And everybody goes to meet it. If you don't meet it, I take your license. And I will expect banking too. I'm setting you a target. You must do this kind of reforms. These are the rates for trading. This is how you deal with FX. If you don't do it, your license is endangered. I expect that NERC will do the same thing, and we should see progress. But people must understand that we have to painstakingly plan this, learning from our experiences with CAPME, where people were supposed to advance payment for their meters, get it, I think, in 45 days, and in some cases, they never got it. So it looked like advance fee fraud, and government was caught in the middle. This time, we are trying to get parties to contract at arm's length so that we just supervise what goes on.
Now, looking at, yeah, let's go to this one. You talked about a 10 trillion naira infrastructure bond while defending your ministry's budget only recently. I think it was this week.
Yeah, I think it was on Monday.
And a number of people felt 10 trillion naira is rather ambitious. However, they also wonder, if, one, if we have the capacity, and two, if that would not be too much a debt for the country, if that is, I mean, if that's something you're proposing, for instance.
Let me just put a context to it. I think that there is enough literature, enough reportage about how much Nigeria needs to bridge its infrastructure gap. They've been quantified in dollars, billions of dollars. We've seen enough of that. There's also been enough reportage about the so-called power of the private sector to provide this money, and that government is probably the one not speaking their language. But how many people have acted to see what is possible? I know that the president has acted. He has mobilized funds from NSIA under the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund to ensure that projects like Second Niger Bridge, Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, Abuja-Kanu East-West Road, and Mambila are not challenged in any significant way by funding again. But that is only about 5 or 6 of hundreds of other infrastructure within my ministry and within the Ministry of Transportation, airports that need to be completed, rail that needs to be built. So instead of all just knowing what is wrong, I suggest let us try. We've raised a sukuk, which was capital mobilized from private sector, 100 billion, 100 billion. Can that market take more? Let's test the market. Let's see whether it will respond. So I say, let's do 10 trillion. How much is 10 trillion? 10 trillion, our capital budget is 30% of 8 trillion budget. So that's roughly about 2.4 trillion. And we still don't have enough resources to fund that. So why don't you do something similar to what I had the opportunity to do back in Lagos? Get a law to raise 275 billion, which I did. And then every time I need funding, I go to the market, I need to draw down 50 billion. So we can do the same thing. Get a law, raise 10 trillion, but every time you now have maybe a need for 1 trillion, go to the market, get your bookmakers together and your advisors and say, can the market give us a trillion? On what time frame? Then there's so many things that have also been done in Latin America that helps also to put recovered, stolen funds back to work for the people. And so let's just test this market. Maybe we have underestimated the market and didn't realize its full potential. Maybe we're overrating the market too. I wouldn't know. But 10 trillion is just insignificant given what we say we need. Schools, hospitals, there's a lot to do.
Let's quickly take questions from my colleagues in Lagos.
Well, yeah, good morning. Sorry to take you back a little bit to this metering and electricity challenge before we'll come back to infrastructure, hopefully. Could you talk to us about this eligible customer policy where customers are expected or can get access to electricity directly from the GENCOs? We understand it's 2 years on and no one has been licensed for that. What is the current situation at the moment?
It's not 2 years on. I think we set out the policy late in, early in 2017. The regulations were made last year, I think. And it is after the regulations were made that applications were made. We have licensed 5 companies, largely steel companies, who are now taking their power directly from the generation companies. They're taking from Kanji, I think they're taking from Jeba and Shiruru, and we are monitoring their progress. And we see that those industries are now getting more regular supply. The GENCOs are now getting more regular returns compared to the 20% that used to come from the DISCO collection. And that is good news. Now we have 15 more applications that are under review. There are lots of agreements that need to be signed because technically, or notionally, not technically, notionally, it is perceived that every time an eligible customer who consumes from 2 megawatt above goes to a DISCO, notionally, it is assumed that that DISCO has lost a customer. In real fact, they have not. Because if the DISCO was giving them 6 hours and they go directly to the GENCO to get 24 hours, what we have done is to put a competition transition charge in place. So you pay the DISCO what you used to pay him for the 6 hours he used to give you, and then contract your power directly with the GENCO. And we are making progress. It takes time for policy to translate to action and then finally to results. But we are seeing traction. And we are encouraged by what we see. 5 successful industrial cases and more to come.
Yeah, Honorable Minister, you spoke the other time about 2,000 megawatts of electricity that is stranded, although some contend that it's a ruse, that is not true. But so what do we do now going forward, seeing that 2,000 megawatts of electricity stranded somewhere that needs to be used by so many Nigerians that you will probably have the figure? How do we get that to the people who you know need it?
Sir, first of all, let me say that in trying to solve our problems, the media has a very important role to fact check, to dispute, and to assert authoritatively on the basis of its findings what it sees. I have been to almost all our power plants except about 3. I have visited all discos. I have been to major substations, at least in every geopolitical zone of this country. So if I say something happens, it is the evidence of what I see. If you choose to continue to believe those who sit in their rooms and say that what I say is not correct, then it will be unhelpful to have a conversation. It is only the person that has seen what I see who can have a meaningful argument with me. Now, I also am aware that on a daily basis, we publish how much is peak power generated and how much is off-peak power generated. And that is what other countries do. Now, between peak power and off-peak power, which peak power averages about 4,009, sometimes 5,000, off-peak power is between 3,000 and sometimes 2,000. And that is a measure of demand. Then there is an average daily power. Now, if you choose to report the average as peak power, that is your problem. And we need to help people understand this, because people do not demand energy at the same measure at the same time through the day. I have left my house now, so I've switched off all the appliances in my house. So peak power in that area of that disco goes down. The energy I will need now is the energy to operate in the office, and that will begin to rise. And so we need to understand all of these things. So, and I think that would be my response to what people say.
Well, you have said that there are some states currently enjoying about 24-hour power supply. You mentioned, I think, Kebbi.
And I think it was Yobe or Maiduguri where they were complaining, because I got a report from Yola Disco, who serves that franchise, that the people were saying they don't want 24-hour power because the bills are too much.
Okay, it's interesting that they're complaining of too much electricity, so to speak, but some people are saying we're getting estimated billings and, you know, we're not getting any electricity commensurate to what it is that we ought to be supplied, or so to say, or the bills that we're getting. However, the question is, from what you see, from the vantage view that you have, when do you think that at least 50% of the country will be covered by, you know, say 24-hour power supply?
Well, it is easy for me to say this is the date, but our realities are that sometimes our projections fall off schedule. I've told you, for example, we have equipment in the ports for 9 university projects. Those projects should have been completed in the last quarter of last year, but we're dealing with those realities. We finished Afam Power. We are almost completing Kashimbila. We should have finished last year. It was delayed by financing challenges. But we know what we are doing, and we expect to increase that as part of our next level commitment. These are commitments.
Given a worst case scenario, I mean, of course there will definitely be challenges, but in a worst case scenario, what are your projections for
My projections are that before the end of the next term, we should experience more stable power. And that is as much as I can honestly and sincerely commit. Because it's a big country, there will still be many areas that we will not have reached because of viability, because of financial, because as businessmen too, the whole country hasn't been connected by telecoms 17 years after.
But
there are still places where your network won't work, and that's why people carry 3-4 phones. So let's just understand this. Not every part of the country also has banking services. They are largely in the capital. So let's just understand where we are.
Well, let's take another break. When we come back, we'll be wrapping up this conversation on power. Please stay with us. These are the kind of times you wish you had an hour extra on the program, but you know, it's our closing moment here with the Minister of Power Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola, SAN. And just quickly, I would like you to address as quickly as you can this issue of service, because sometimes people think it's not so much as the fact that we do not have 24-hour supply as to the fact that we have poor customer service on the part of the distribution companies. How are you addressing that? Do you see that as a challenge, and how are you addressing that?
It's a very interesting subject, and some of the opinions I personally formed is that we're very nice people, we're very hospitable people, but we need to raise our game about service across the spectrum. We had a retreat in Owerri last week, and those were the issues that we addressed. At the end of the year, we did Ember Month planning, for example. And what did we try to do? We know that it will get hot at that time of the year. How can we get more energy to those places? We know that people are going to be moving in a particular direction for end of year festivities. How can we improve the conditions in which they speak very, very clearly to service? Now in Owerri, one of the things that challenge them, we haven't done this before, but rainy season is coming. Just like the Europeans prepare for winter, get their snow plows ready, get their grit and salt ready, let us plan for this rainy season. We know where the floods are likely to come from. Can we work with the states to ensure that they do their deflooding ahead of the rains so that the impact on the roads are reduced? Where are the places where contractors are building but haven't finished? Can they begin to plan to make those places motorable and improve the commuting experience of people during the rainy season? This is work that needs to be done. So my team have signed up for this, and this cuts across the spectrum. You get to a hotel room, your shower is not working, they think you are being arrogant by asking for service, a switch doesn't work, and those are again maintenance issues which we are taking on headlong. But yesterday, my flight was delayed for 2 hours. I wasn't told it was going to be delayed, but I think they have my data. So these are service issues, and it's a conversation we need to have as a nation.
It's a
how
conversation
to improve service.
that we should certainly have. And I know that, you know, we're almost totally out of time, but I'd like you to say something on housing, especially to young people who are looking, who say, I earn a constant salary. I think that instead of paying rent every year, I can afford to contribute this towards owning my own home. What would you say to them?
What I would say is that it is not impossible, but there are rules and regulations to this, and there are choices also to be made. How much do you earn and where do you want to live? If you are just starting work, do you want to live in Maitama? Can you afford it? And people must also understand that all over the world, people don't just own homes. They migrate usually and sometimes from rental to ownership. And it's a journey of life. But the ultimate desire to own a home is largely possible for Nigerians if we all do the right things. Again, you must have a banking record.
What are you doing in that regard?
What we're doing, strengthening the capacity of Federal Mortgage Bank, for example, to grant loans, and hopefully taking them to a larger market outside of the civil servants so that they can have more resources. Because right now, under the National Housing Scheme, it's only public service workers who contribute. There's so many people, transporters, businessmen, traders, who are not contributing to that fund, so they can't access that fund. Other things that we're doing, we're issuing title documents. People have applied for C of Os for 11, 15 years. We're clearing that backlog because it adds to the formation, access to land to build. We're granting consent to land transactions that have accumulated over the years. I've done over 2,000, and we're publishing them periodically. So it's not just building. There's a lot of things being done. We are also funding private developers to build houses and financing them by mortgage. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And it speaks generally to the level of our national development. And these are issues I think we should have a national consensus about, so that when decisions have to be made in Parliament, when decisions have to be made in the judiciary and in the executive, everybody works with the background of that consciousness at the back of his mind that this is our national goal. I must act in my own department, not to sabotage that national goal.
Well, let us see who will be driving that national conversation and where that national conversation will be happening. But it's always good to have you on Sunrise City. We hope to have you again, especially in a discussion for service provision and service delivery. But thank you for coming on Sunrise Daily. Babatunde Fashola, SAN, is the Minister of Power, Works and Housing, and he's been speaking to us in our studios here in Abuja. That's the program this morning. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your comments. Sadly, we couldn't take as much as we would like, but thank you. I'm Maukwe Ogun Yusuf.
I'm Chamberlain Oso.
I am Akinde here saying have a wonderful day.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this program are those of the maker and do not reflect the views, opinions, and endorsement of Channels Television.